Good morning, Feedfeed people. I am Rebecca from Displaced Housewife, and today I'm going to make raspberry scones with lemon glaze. I'm the Feedfeed editor for Scones, the vodka feed, Sunday suppers, and tacos. I need you guys to be really kind to me today because I have a nasty head cold and this is how I'm really feeling. This is my favorite. Last scone note is I make scones every weekend for a local bakery, so I make a lot of scones and I'll have a lot of tips for you today. Enough about me. I have in here 2 different flours. I use cake flour and all-purpose flour when I'm making scones. Cake flour has a lot lower protein content. It's going to make the crumb lighter, airier, and get rid of some of that hardness, heaviness that's usually associated with scones, and dryness. I'm like, I cannot handle a dry scone if my life depended on it. 2 flours, a generous hand with the baking powder, lemon zest, cinnamon, salt, and sugar. Fluffed that around and mixed it up with a fork. You could just as easily use a whisk. And now I'm going to go grab my cold ingredient. Use an extra large liquid measuring cup so that I can throw the egg and the cream in there and just whisk it in there right away. I understand having to use extra dishes, so I'd rather just use the measuring cup, use the fork that I fluff things around with, because by the weekend I'm kind of lazy. So I get my pastry blender, and I've already cut my butter into 8 chunks, 1 stick, and then I'm just going to cut it. And then I'm going to basically chop everything up until it's the size of peas. So if you can see, there's some smaller chunks, but for the most part, I would say they're like pea-sized, and everything's blended nicely. I'm gonna drizzle in the whisked, beaten together egg and cream, and then I'm gonna stir it around a little bit. I like to do this with the fork until it starts to sort of meld together. This is around the point where I get in there with my hands and I start to kind of press it a little bit so it becomes a little bit more cohesive. So I'm doing a little bit of like a folding technique-ish thing. So see how that's kind of a ball? Right now is about the time that we're it's the time that we're gonna add our berries. A quick note about them. We want them to be firm and fresh. You don't want to go for fruit. So you want to make sure your berries are firm and fresh, like I said, because otherwise you're gonna have them bleed all over the scone, but it will be like a crime scene if they're mushy. I always put some underneath and kind of press the dough down, and then I put like a big handful on top, and then I'm going to press these down. So I'm just kind of folding them in, and I'll add more berries as necessary. You need to know this is going to make your dough slick and snotty. When you fold it in like that, you really don't have to work your dough much. So we're just going to put this gloppy mess onto my cutting board. Alright, so I've already lightly floured my cutting board. See how like moist this is? Everybody's favorite food word. So I'm going to sort of cut. So I always leave a little pile of flour over here for me to grab because as you can see your hands get a little disgusting. Use a really sharp knife. Oh, I could use my pastry. So I'm just sort of putting these into 4 petite little scone rounds. If I was doing them for the bakery, I would only split this dough into 2. Because when people get a scone from the bakery, they want it to be huge, but if you're making these at home, chances are you want to have more to feed a larger crowd. Okay. Okay, as you can see, my hands are really disgusting. You just gotta like punch on through with that, sculpt them as much as you can, then we're gonna shove them on a baking sheet. On a baking sheet covered with parchment paper, and then we're going to shove them in the freezer so that they can chill out and they'll be easier to cut and manage. I just want to show you guys one more thing. I try to keep the sides of my scones at 90-degree angles. That will help them rise up instead of out. Scones are going to go in the freezer for at least 15 minutes, if not 30. Might be a little bit better, because when they have fruit like that, they're especially, when they have that much fruit, the same goes for blueberries, it can really make that dough wetter and more difficult to handle, and freezer time will make your life a lot easier. We're going to preheat our oven to 400, and I want you guys to make sure you have a rack in the top third of. They didn't take very long to get a nice chill on them, and I put a little more flour on my cutting board, cleaned it up a bit, and then I'm going to cut them. To use a bread knife for cutting them, and another tip when you cut scones is to cut straight up and down instead of kind of a seesaw action. You want to keep sides as crisp as possible. They are cute little teeny tiny scones, and if you can see, their edges are nice and straight up and down there. I use really large baking sheets. I like to make sure there's ample space so that none of the scones run into each other. These are going to go in the oven for about 13 minutes in that top rack. So while those are baking, I'm going to go over a couple of my scone tips for you. And one of them I've already mentioned, and that is freezing your dough. You're going to want to give it some time to freeze before you bake it, and then you're also, if you want, you can keep them in the freezer at that point and just freeze them solid. Second tip is you're going to want to use the cake flour as half of your flour in this. Don't skimp. It's going to make your scone lighter and have a really nice crunch. Okay, this one makes it look like I've smoked since I was born, and actually my voice is really working with it. The third tip, my third tip is make sure your fruit is fresh. That one's pretty self-explanatory because you don't want to use mushy, gross fruit. About baking powder, you should really strive for the aluminum-free baking powder and also the double acting. That will. Last tip for now is that you need to take into consideration the humidity where you live. If you live in Hawaii, you will use a little bit less cream. If you live in, say, Palm Springs, you're going to need to use a little bit more. I go into more detail on that specifically on my blog. These guys just got out of the oven. They're looking pretty good. I like to let them cool on the baking sheet for a little bit and slowly acclimate to room temp. Those that follow me often know that I really like to make things look pretty. So I'm going to use my bench scraper and cut off some of the darker areas. Just whisked up the glaze, and it has powdered sugar, lemon zest, and lemon juice. And I'm just going to tell you right now, you're going to need more liquid than that recipe says. I just have you start off with a little bit because you can always add more, but it becomes a pain when you have to keep adding more powdered sugar. I'd rather just add little bits of liquid in at a time. Just a quick shot of the consistency that we're going for. We want it thick enough to hold its place, but thin enough to drizzle. Okay, guys, I think that's it for the day. If you would like to follow me, I'm over on Snapchat at Displaced Tie Tie. Or you can follow me on Instagram. I'm Displaced Housewife there, and my website is also displacedhousewife.com. If you are interested, Usually like to post lots of sweets, lots of cookies, lots of scones, and then I usually try to do some quick meals in there as well. Would like to do a snap for the feed, send them a snap and let them know what it is you'd like to do. Since I wasn't feeling that, so if I left anything out or you have any questions, please feel free to send me a note on Instagram, Snapchat, or give me an email.